Welcome, everybody, and to the local COTE leaders. Glad you could join us today. Hopefully we'll have a few more joining as time goes on. So we're going to have a full schedule today, and I'm going to hand it over to Heidi Creighton to talk a little bit about what we're going to be talking about here.
Great. Hi, everybody. As Bill just said, I'm Heidi Creighton, AIA. I co-chair this local COTE network with Sharon. So really this network has been created so that we can better understand, engage, and support all of you and the individual local COTE chapters. And we really want this network to be an opportunity to utilize national AIA and AIA California resources as we all work together to really transform the profession and really move the needle at both state and the local levels. So these roundtables, they're developed from the outreach that we did with the local COTE committees at the chapter level to really discover what resources and information that you need to help grow your COTE efforts really successfully. And the roundtable topics were developed with your feedback to provide you with updates and helpful information on a quarterly basis. So this is the third one that we've held, and we're going to be talking today about how to make the case for all electric and net zero carbon building design. Flashing up here is the agenda for today. And then the next slide. If you do have any questions throughout, please click on the chat button, which is located on the black menu bar, either on the top or the bottom of your computer screen, and you can type in your questions there. And you can submit questions either to the entire group directly or to Katie Dahl. And then during the Q&A period, you can also raise your hand by clicking on the participants, which is under the three dots next to your unmute me, and then select raise hand. But first, before we dive into the topic for today, Bill's going to just walk us through update on what AIA California COTE has been up to.
Thanks, Heidi. So I think we'll just do a brief overview of what AIA California Climate Action is doing. It's progressing nicely despite the pandemic. And I would say that our nation's current ongoing political dramas remind us once again that California's leadership in climate action is needed now more than ever by our country and by the world. So we continue to approach this complicated topic or intermeshing of topics on multiple tracks. First, the local electrification code. Scott Schell, who is chair of the advocacy subcommittee, is along with Simone, have been doing a great job to push electrification codes locally, along with our partners. The jurisdictions include every place from San Carlos and Los Altos to Petaluma, San Francisco, and San Luis Obispo, and we're continuing to work on that effort. The state electrification codes and standards, AIA California has asked California Energy Commission to make electrification a part of the 2022 California Energy Code and try to reduce the impact of fossil fuel use. On the Zero Code for California, which, as many of you know, has been a big topic of our agenda over the last year or two. We successfully worked with Architecture 2030 to update the Zero Code for California to reflect the ambitious efforts underway in California regarding electrification codes. AIA California has petitioned the state to include the Zero Code for California in the California Green Building Code. This is currently under consideration as part of the Building Codes and Standards adoption process. One exciting recent development is that AIA Los Angeles is advocating for Los Angeles to adopt the Zero Code as a REACH code, and we're very much excited about helping them achieve that effort, which would be a huge boost in getting the Zero Code adopted in the state. International existing building codes, as we all know, there's nothing, the most sustainable building out there is the one that's already been built. So AIA California has petitioned the state to include the work area and performance chapters of the international existing building code into the California existing building code to give architects and owners more options on how to repurpose existing buildings. This is currently under consideration as part of the building codes and standards adoption process. We're also trying to push forward, thanks to Mike Malinowski and others, we've joined a coalition of groups asking the governor to issue an executive order requiring all homes and buildings to be fossil fuel free. On the topic of mandatory continuing education efforts, as many of you know, one of our agenda items has been to adopt an additional 5 learning units every 2 years required for licensure in California for any architect. That would be 5 units in zero carbon design. So following the AIA California Board of Directors support in July of that initiative, Mark Christian and I from AIA California presented the proposed legislative efforts to the California Architects Board earlier this year. And then on Friday, we presented the concept to the California Architects Board Professional Qualifications Committee, and I'm happy to report that they voted unanimously to forward it back to CAB and to work together with CAB, between CAB and AI California, to advocate strongly for this change to occur. We feel that every architect in the state needs to be well educated about zero carbon design. And as you'll see at the topic of this meeting, the business case is very compelling, both for architects and for clients. The AIA California Residential Architectural Awards Program, implemented in 2018. Every project submitted within the AIA California Design Awards and Residential Awards programs are previewed by a committee of technical experts to evaluate and score the sustainability strategies to better help each jury with their award selection process. This year, AIA California included the Common App as a part of the Design Awards and Residential Awards submission process, which was developed by AIA National, AIA COTE National. With the residential awards just wrapping up, the jury has reported the technical review input was very helpful to the jury's evaluation of the submissions. And then finally, we get around to the white paper that we're going to be discussing today, Making the Case for Climate Action. I worked with today's presenters, Henry Siegel and Jonathan Feldman, to author the white paper. They did most of the work. And the business case for climate action, which we created to show how architectural practice is changing to meet decarbonization demands and to make the case that zero carbon design is not just an environmental imperative, it's also good for business, which Henry and Jonathan will dive into more deeply in today's roundtable. This white paper is published on the AIA California website now, and so staff will be sure to link that, provide that link in the chat box. So with that, I will hand it back to Heidi, and let's get started.
Great. So just wanted to introduce our fantastic speakers for today. So first we have Jonathan Feldman, AIA, who's Feldman Architecture's founding partner and CEO. And since establishing the firm in 2003, he's led its development into a residential and commercial design practice that really has been recognized for creating warm, light-filled spaces with an understated modern aesthetic. Jonathan is very passionate about design that solves complex problems. And we also have Henry Siegel, FAIA, and since the early 1990s, Henry has really championed the idea that sustainable design is an essential element of good design, which I very much agree with. So he's put that conviction into practice through projects that have combined design and environmental stewardship in thoughtful, site-sensitive ways. And his projects have won local, regional, and national awards, including multiple top 10 Green Projects of the Year from AIA Committee on the Environment. Next slide, we just are flashing up. Oh, did we want to do the learning objectives? Or jump right in?
Sorry, my mistake.
No worries. Okay, Great, thank you, Katie. So here's the learning objectives of today, which you can just read through. But as you're all aware, right, that there's just a significant amount of carbon emissions in California that come from construction and operations of buildings, and the resulting environmental impacts are enormous. And clients and agencies who review projects may not be aware of these impacts and the importance and the urgency of decarbonizing our building sector. So our hope is this program is really going to show you how our practice is changing to meet these demands and to really make the case for zero carbon buildings. It's not just an environmental imperative, it's also really good for business. Okay, so with that, we'll pass it off to Jonathan and Henry.
Okay, is that showing?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Hello, everyone. This is Henry. So we're going to launch into this. It'll take about a half an hour, and hopefully we'll have time answering lots of questions at the end. So most architects understand that climate change is urgent, and some of our clients understand this too, and even commit to designing low-carbon buildings. But most of our clients are looking to us for guidance, and we need to answer their questions about climate change, and we also need to answer their practical questions about what low carbon design means to their specific project and to their budgets. This presentation provides some answers. Today, Jonathan's going to first talk about the big picture, climate change, the political climate, the slew of new regulations and codes headed our way, job creation, and social equity issues. Then I'll get into the practical questions like, how much does it cost? And how does it affect operating cost? We only have the time to touch on each of these issues briefly, but we're going to provide lots of links and resources on each topic, so don't scramble to write them down because we'll post this on the website when we're done. And then we'll leave time for discussion at the end. The presentation is based on a white paper, as already been mentioned, and that's gone out in the email. It's posted on the website, and this link at the bottom of the page is a link to that white paper. So you'll be able to find all of this posted after the presentation is over. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Henry. Check that mute button. Good. Since this discussion looks at making the business case for net zero buildings, we're going to look at some of the costs associated with climate action in our industry and some of the costs of inaction. When we look at all the factors we are considering here today, we hope it'll be obvious to you, as it is to all of us putting on this discussion, that low carbon buildings will save money, construction costs and operating costs. Of course, we already know that low carbon buildings are more healthful, resilient, energy dependent, and they are safer. But we can also say they are good business. And if we act quickly and stave off the most significant fallout from an ever-changing climate, all of our businesses will benefit from the increased physical and economic stability, which we can all help to create. Next slide, please, Henry. Let's first look at the societal costs of climate change in a very brief way. The construction and operating of buildings represents one of the largest sources of greenhouse gas emissions. Our industry is a large and a direct contributor to climate change, with its many negative outcomes, from rising temperatures, rising sea levels, increased air pollution, to droughts, wildfires, tornadoes, and threats of food security. Next slide, please. The US government's fourth National Climate Assessment from 2018 confirmed to everyone that inaction is not a viable choice. The impacts are accelerating faster than anyone had previously predicted. The report concluded that avoiding catastrophic climate impacts requires, and I quote, a rapid and far-reaching transformation of human civilization at a magnitude that's never happened before. While the costs and complexity of combating these changes may be considerable, they will be significantly greater if we wait. Investments in resilience now will be far less expensive than reacting to a more dire situation later. Next. Most architects understand the enormous impact of our work on the environment. More than 20% of carbon emissions in California come from our buildings, from the construction and operating of the buildings. And this is closer to 40% on a national level. California is responding by setting ambitious statewide greenhouse emission limits, which will require rapid decarbonization across every major sector and will impact millions of buildings. Next. On the legislative level, next slide, I think, Henry. Thank you. Legislatively, in 2018, Jerry Brown signed two really important bills. One that called for $50 million annually to empower Californians to reduce energy costs, improve air quality, and cut climate pollution. And then another one that year that set the stage for reducing emissions from buildings down to 40% below the 1990 levels by the year 2030. Bill Leddy mentioned in his intro a lot of ongoing progress at the state and local efforts to adopt electrification codes. Many public agencies are studying how to quickly reduce building sector carbon emissions and are concluding that eliminating fossil fuels from buildings is the most important way forward. Next. California is already a national leader with its energy codes for buildings, yet they still don't go nearly far enough to address the problems we are facing. Local governments can adopt more stringent requirements by passing REACH codes. Nearly 40 cities have already passed these, and close to that amount, almost 40 more, have it in the works, including San Francisco and Oakland. Larger cities we are seeing are starting to get on board for the first time, and this is a very exciting development. Next. The Zero Code for California provides a guide for new buildings that integrates cost-effective energy efficiency standards with on-site or off-site renewable energy to support the construction of a zero carbon building. The Zero Code applies to new commercials, institutional, and mid and high-rise residential buildings, which are the dominant building types being constructed in our cities today. And very shortly on November 16th at noon, AIA LA will be hosting a great discussion on this topic titled 2020 Zero Code for California with Ed Mazria and a great panel of folks, including some of the people here from Architecture 2030 and AIA Committee on the Environment. So I encourage everyone to attend that. Next slide. Incentives are easing the path towards electrification. They often come in the form of rebates and financing, and there are many sources in this complex and constantly changing landscape. And if I am allowed to say, with more progressive leadership on the national level, fingers crossed, I haven't checked my election updates in a couple of hours, there are likely to be a lot more developments in this area. Next slide. Many economists have written about the promise of a green economy and its ability to create jobs. California has already been a leader in this area, and the more we continue to lead on climate change, the more it will benefit our local and state economies. Next, please. It's worth mentioning that the power grid and the decreasing role of gas in our state, in addition to health and indoor air quality, resiliency and safety, there are large cost benefits for switching from gas to electricity. Rather than facing enormous cost of replacing an aging gas infrastructure, PG&E has recognized this and is committed to switching to electric. As we switch to electric grid, electric buildings, and electric vehicles, there will be downward pressure on the costs of this clean energy. There will be decreasing need to grow the power grid and lower costs of its construction and maintenance. In short, the more we transition to electricity, the more compelling the financial models become. Next slide, please. This is an excellent paper that I encourage you all to read. The links are, as Henry said, up here and also in the paper that is available online. This notes, this paper, Vision for an Equitable Climate Action, notes that the injustice of climate change creates a moral obligation and a call to action. Structural racism and economic injustice have meant that those who are least responsible for the climate crisis and have the least resources to adapt are being hit first and hardest. Communities that have historically borne the brunt of public health and environmental harms from exploitative and toxic industries, as well as those whose energy burdens are disproportionately high, have been sacrificed for the whole. And looking beyond the moral imperative here, it's important to mention that California climate goals are very bold. California can't meet them without bringing everyone along, including disadvantaged communities. If their buildings aren't upgraded and electrified, we simply won't get there. Next slide. Recently, we've seen affordable housing projects that meet high standards of zero carbon design. They demonstrate that projects with stringent cost targets can also achieve ambitious performance and emission standards. Increasingly, developers are proving that they are willing to consider the triple bottom line with mutual benefits to people, planet, and profits. And I know Henry has more examples of some of these inspirational projects in his deck. And with that, Henry, I think you have the next slides.
Great, so thanks, Jonathan. So now we'll turn to some more practical questions like, what are the benefits? What will this cost up front? How will it affect the value of my project? As Jonathan said, the answers are compelling. Low carbon buildings will save money, especially for new projects, but in many cases will save costs for rehabilitation projects as well. Emissions are reduced, of course, and low carbon buildings are more healthful, resilient, energy independent, and safe. Our clients and our communities all benefit from this approach. So firstly, low carbon design lowers construction costs. It's a win for the planet and for the bottom line. Electrification is a key strategy for achieving lower cost and lower emissions. And there are promising developments in electrification at both the grid level and at building scale. By the way, all the quotes you see on these title slides are from an article where architects experience in talking about climate change with their clients, talk about how they do it. And if I don't pause long enough for you to read the whole thing, you'll be able to find it in the slideshow and the deck. And I'll link to it in the white paper. In California, the grid is getting greener, with 1/3 of all electricity derived from renewable sources and another 12% from large hydro. So we're over 50% already. Utilities and community choice aggregators offer plans that are from 100% renewable sources without adding much, if any, to the cost of your utility bills. At the building level, heat pump technology has really improved over the last 10 years, and heat pump equipment is now much more efficient than the most efficient gas equipment by a ratio of 3.5 to 1. So that is, for every 1 unit of energy input, you get 3.5 times more from a heat pump than from a comparable gas appliance. Heat pumps provide heating and cooling, of course, and also water heating and even clothes drying. Heat pumps also support equity goals, and we touched on this already. And to quote from the E3 study below, they have a climate adaptation advantage because they provide both air conditioning and heating. Air conditioning, along with better building design and more resilient communities, can help protect health in low-income and vulnerable communities as heat waves become more severe due to climate change. So going all electric saves cost by eliminating gas piping on the site and in the building. And as noted, heat pumps heat and cool, so one piece of equipment replaces two. This E3 study shows first cost savings for all electric projects in 4 California cities. They analyzed first costs for all appliances for new construction for both single family and multifamily housing in 2019. The dark green is all electric. The light green is mixed fuel. So you can see that first cost for all of these, 7 out of 8 of these, is much less for all electric. The only exception to that is low-rise multifamily in San Francisco and I believe the cause for that is you don't need air conditioning in San Francisco, so they could eliminate that and do heating only. But in most places in the state, we do need air conditioning, and in most places, the cost of all electric will be less. Retrofitting presents a more complex picture. This is a study from Rocky Mountain Institute that looked at new buildings and retrofits. So all electric are the green bars and mixed fuel are the blue bars. On the left, you'll see that for new construction, again, their study showed, and this is for Oakland, but they looked at different cities around the state and all around the country, that new construction is always cheaper if you build all electric. In the case of retrofits, it's cheaper in the case of, if you're adding air conditioning to a retrofit, going all electric will be cheaper. It's still a little bit more expensive if you're not adding air conditioning to your retrofit, but that is going to change as gas rates go up and as new all-electric equipment comes online, it's more efficient.
Henry, can I also add that will change as temperatures rise, as we see more and more of our clients asking for air conditioning in places where they used to not.
Thank you. Jonathan pointed out there are a lot of rebate programs throughout the state. Most of these are pointed, at the moment at least, towards residential projects. And they're going to further incentivize switching to all electric equipment by giving you money back for fuel switching if it's a retrofit project, or for purchasing all electric equipment for a new project. Most of these are sponsored by the utilities themselves because many of them, like PG&E, which is the largest investor-owned utility in California, see the writing on the wall and they want out of the gas business. Okay, time for a break from graphs for a moment. Here are a few examples of all electric affordable housing projects. And we really wanted to highlight affordable housing in particular because these projects always have challenging construction budgets. Even with that constraint, they're succeeding in building all electric. From medium-sized projects like this one by Koenig Eisenberg in Los Angeles, to these more modest projects all around the state that Redwood Energy consults on and helps architects and designers make them into all electric projects, to larger projects like this one by Methuen in San Francisco. The Methuen principal Malcolm Harris says that all electric multifamily housing is, quote, better in every way, a great simplification of the system, less expensive, higher performance, less maintenance, more sustainable. And as mentioned, Scott Shell has put together a slide deck that shows all electric projects all over California, all sorts of building types from small project to large project. And the link at the bottom is a link to that slide deck so that all of you can have that available as examples. This project by David Baker Architects looked at a wide range of climate studies, eliminating the ones they couldn't afford, and then going all in on the ones they could. So the diagrams on the left show the many strategies they looked at and incorporated into the project. Some of the strategies they looked at, like passive house envelope design and passive house windows, proved to be too expensive. But others, like central heat pump water heaters, paid benefits immediately. The project EUI is about 15, which, as most of you I'm sure realize, is quite low. And that's before counting the energy generated on site. And that reduces, the PV system on the roof reduces the EUI to 8, all on an affordable housing budget. And there are many more examples of these types of projects in Scott's deck. So low carbon also equals low operating costs. These buildings are less expensive to operate. The 2019 E3 study showed that household utility bills in California were reduced for all the retrofit projects they studied for both single family and multifamily housing projects. And that also, of course, helps meet the equity goals that we've been talking about. New projects had lower bills for over 50%, and in some cases over 2/3 of the projects, and fewer than 10% of the new projects had to pay more than about $8 a month in addition to because of going all electric. Here's another study. This one's from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, showed that heat pump water heaters saved on operating costs immediately when compared to propane and heating oil. This is a national study, so they're looking at heating oil as well. There's a lot more data like this showing operational cost savings, and links to more information about this in the white paper. So lower emissions is the goal, of course, and these projects succeed in doing that. Embodied carbon reduction strategies can also yield cost savings opportunities, and that's what this quote is talking about, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So this chart comes from a Rocky Mountain Institute study that we saw early, and again, we're looking just at Oakland. All electric projects in Oakland provide a 20% reduction in carbon emissions for new construction, the left side of the chart, and over 30% for retrofit, which is the right side of the chart, even if you're not replacing the air conditioning. So there is still an emissions benefit in retrofits, even if they cost a little more. Again, this study covers many other locations in California, so you can look at it and find something closer to your area. And as the grid gets cleaner, the differential in emissions for all electric houses will continue to improve. That is, the emissions from all electric will be reduced while the emissions from mixed fuel buildings will stay about the same. What about source energy? As many of you know, source energy is the power generated at the power plant, and there's considerable line loss in sending it out through the grid to your project. Another RMI study shows that even with that line loss, all electric projects still have substantially less emissions than mixed fuel projects. And let's not forget emissions due to embodied carbon. Existing buildings save somewhere between 50 and 75% of embodied carbon compared to a new building. This should change the calculus about how we think about rehab projects. We should be saving more buildings rather than tearing them down to build new. Even new buildings can get a savings of 30% in embodied carbon simply by paying close attention to the concrete mix that you use. We also need to greatly improve the performance of rehab projects. Title 24 does not require much in the way of energy upgrading if you're not adding square footage. We need to change that. We should be making these projects net zero, or even coming close to meeting a current version of Title 24 would mean great upgrades for these buildings. So some of your clients may be really concerned about health impacts, and there's lots of new evidence that all electric homes are better for your health. This is yet another study by RMI and others that shows that the increased awareness of the negative health effects of cooking with gas. In fact, the cooking with gas, it creates indoor air pollution that exceeds what would be allowed if it were happening outdoors. And that has a particular effect on young children. So if your client does care about health as a primary issue, this would be a good place to start with them. Many studies of office environments make the case that high performance buildings lead to greater productivity. Increasing productivity, even just a few percent, is the biggest potential savings for employers, far outweighing construction costs and operational cost. So this recent study is by Stoke, and it found that they outline a lot of the benefits of high performance buildings in terms of hiring, employee retention, and employee productivity. So the bars that show increased productivity for a series of different strategies is what you see on the upper right-hand corner. Savvy clients will welcome an opportunity to improve their organizations by saving money, increasing stability, improving office culture, employee health, and of course, productivity. And all electric offices are being built throughout the state at every size and scale, like this very large project in Sacramento, almost 1 million square feet, to this lower rise project, still a very large one in the Silicon Valley by WRNS. And a lot of corporations are aware of the benefits, and they're putting serious money into greening their projects and making them all electric because they are aware of the studies that like the Stoke study, and they're putting their money where their mouth is. Finally, low carbon buildings, especially with those that have site renewables and better battery backup, will be able to respond better to more frequent power outages that climate change is bringing. This study is showing that at the utility scale, the cost of renewable energy has decreased dramatically. And this study, which is from last year, shows that newly installed renewable energy capacity costs less than the least expensive fossil fuel option. The tables have turned at the utility scale. And they have at the site level too. The cost of renewable energy has dropped dramatically and is now one of the lowest cost sources of energy. PV systems can be financed in such a way that monthly utility bills will be less than monthly bills from the financing will be less than the monthly utility bills you might receive in California. The average cost per watt for building solar systems was over $7 just a few years ago and is now below $3. And the little chart at the top is a snippet of one location in California. And if you look up this source online, you'll see lots of other locations in California, and they're all under $3 a watt as of 2020. Tesla says they can now supply rooftop solar for as little as $1.49 a watt after tax credits with a payback of just 4 to 5 years. But there's another important benefit when you include battery backup. It allows you to time shift when you use energy by using batteries to avoid taking power from the grid during peak load periods. That's the most expensive power, so you're reducing operating cost. And you're also reducing the need for utilities to fire up dirty peaker plants to kick in more power for the grid. Again, a win both for the owners and for the environment. So that's a lot of information thrown at you very quickly. You'll be able to find and dig into this in more detail in the white paper. And hopefully it's set up in such a way that you can find the points of interest that are important to you or your client and then just dig into those particular links. But I wanted to end by talking briefly about finding ways to share this kind of information with our clients. Most of the quotes scattered throughout the slideshow are from a recent article in Architect magazine where architects talk about how they communicate effectively. That's the link at the bottom of the slide. One message from them is clear. We have to keep our clients' concerns in front when presenting low carbon strategies. However, architects have great communication skills that work well for this. We're good at providing a vision for the future and for how we're going to get there. We know how to lead with the kind of issues that clients care about, such as lower cost or health. We know how to explain the issues with data, with stories, and with images. You can find countless articles on the web about communicating about climate change, and I encourage you to look at them. All of these articles lead with the same points that I'm making here, but it's really good to sort of dig into some of that and really drive home how you make these points effectively to your clients. There's also another way. Given the urgency of combating climate change, this needs to become standard practice. We have the tools and the know-how now. Low carbon design should simply become part of every project, just like universal accessibility has. It's something we no longer necessarily talk a lot about. It's just what we do. The same should be true for low carbon design. And it's not hard to do. Ed Masria has been cheering us on and calling for action for nearly 20 years now, and he's always optimistic about where we're headed. He points out that we know what to do, that it's simple, it's not complicated. And he also points out that architects have transformed the world before, from the Bauhaus to the Lever House, and that we can do it again, and we need to be doing that now. In fact, the impetus just keeps on growing, and this goes back to some of the things Bill was talking about at the beginning. Less than 2 weeks ago, the LA Times had an editorial, and I don't believe the LA Times is the most progressive newspaper in the state, pointing out the fact that Governor Newsom recently pledged to end gasoline-fueled cars in the state and calling for him to do the same for buildings. So the LA Times is calling for Newsom to require new homes to be all electric in the near future. So we have a looming deadline, which requires urgent action. Architects know how to meet this challenge. We also have the political will at the state and local levels to make this happen, backed by legislation and code changes. And the economics of low carbon design are also now in our favor. This is a great challenge, of course, and it's also a great opportunity for us and our clients to do good and to do well. We can make this happen. So that's it for our presentation. And I'm going to turn the slides back to you, Katie. And we're going to open up for questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. So yeah, we're going to turn it over to the Q&A. So if you could either put your question to everyone or directly to Katie, or raise your hand if you'd like to talk your question out loud. But I just thought it's just so powerful and such an important topic of today's discussion, right? And as Henry and Jonathan pointed out, right, these buildings, they save money, both in construction operations, they provide more resiliency, they mitigate climate change and also provide healthier indoor environments. But I know change is hard. So I'd actually be really interested in the chat too, if everyone wouldn't mind sharing any barriers you've encountered or any resistance that you have heard from clients or from AHJs, because I imagine that all of us are probably having similar issues when we do try to work through all of this. So I thought that could be fruitful too, if people would be willing to share. I know for us, when we're doing multifamily residential, a lot of our clients really want gas stoves because they anticipate that that's what the market is going to demand. So just would love to hear everybody's questions. And then let's see, I'm getting a question about getting the PDF with all of the links. Henry, I think so Katie, at the beginning of this chat, she provided a link to this white paper. And I believe all of the links that you presented in the PDF in the presentation today are in that paper. Henry, is that correct?
Yeah, and many of the same links are on the slideshow, and the slideshow is not on the website yet, but it will be soon.
Perfect. And this is also being recorded as well, this presentation.
Heidi, maybe I can just fill the gap with the kind of resistance from clients part. And I think it just speaks to kind of the whole point of this paper, which is to arm us with the arguments to present to the clients. And as we were putting this together, just amazed, if only I had more time. And of course, over time, I can keep chipping away at it. There's so many good articles in there. And speaking to things about the health benefits of gas versus electric cooking, for instance. I find that my clients, just speaking as a practicing architect now, that the resistance I get, when I present kind of green and carbon goals to clients, I get sort of two typical responses. One is, this is really important to me, let's push forward. And the other one is, I'd love to do it as long as I don't have to pay more for it. And I feel like in here, if you read, you can respond to those very well. So it's just about kind of getting ourselves educated. The hope of this paper is to kind of do that, to be a collecting ground where we all share with each other these arguments so that we can advocate collectively, because the knowledge is the thing that will sway the minds. And I think the case is there now. So we just need to absorb it and be able to advocate with that in hand.
I have a question.
And just to answer the induction cooking question a little bit, as somebody who's owned an induction cooktop for about the last 2 months, get out there and try them. They're fantastic. They cook very much like a gas cooktop. They're nothing like a gas resistant or old electric resistance cooktops. They're fast. The temperature adjusts very quickly. They keep your kitchen cleaner because you don't have all those crevices to clean up in your gas cooktop. I think they're an improvement over a typical gas cooktop. So I encourage you all to get out and try them. And there's a place to do that in Northern California. Which is the Food Technology Center in the Bay Area. And there may be places to try them in Southern California as well, I'm sure.
So my question, Henry, we've talked a lot about providing tools to architects around the state, and this white paper is a really great start. But of course, as we all know, it's a big sort of nuanced story. Has there been any further discussion about kind of having a sort of a summary cheat sheet that can be provided to folks with just some of the pertinent facts when they're going in to have these discussions with their clients? Any further thoughts about that?
No, I haven't really given that thought. I think that is something we could put together pretty easily. Just, take our resources and footnotes and sort of put them by operating costs versus first costs versus emissions versus health versus productivity, and just have that so that it's a handy way for people to find what they're looking for very quickly.
Right.
So Scott brought up a good point in the chat about resistances to electric buildings during public safety power shutoffs.
So Scott, maybe you could talk some about that. I know you know a lot about that. If he's still here.
He's here, he's just on mute.
And I will add that with all the people on this call, we'd love everyone to hop in and have answers, not just for Henry or myself or Bill. There's collectively quite a lot of knowledge in this chat right now. And so the intention, I think, is to be a discussion and for us to all share knowledge, questions, best practices.
Well, one thing I will say, if Scott is still muted, is that most gas appliances now are connected to electricity and don't work if the electricity is off. So it's not restricted to electric appliances. Scott's there now, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I just had my wife asking me something. Yeah, I think, a lot of us have experienced public safety power shutoffs, and, it's disrupting. And people think that they can run their hot water heater or their furnace in a power outage, and you can't. They have electric controls and they won't operate. The one exception is a gas cooktop, which you can light with a match. And your oven, you cannot light with a match, as I learned during the last public safety power shutoff.
This is Larry. I have the one thing that I find is not so much a cost issue, it's a knowledge issue, which is we've been looking for contractors for small jobs, heat pump water heaters, and our small commercial office building we want to convert to heat pump. And we're having a hell of a time finding contractors that'll do heat pumps for small projects. It seems the knowledge is out there for big, huge projects, and for small projects, the training just isn't there yet. So I would say that one great thing we could work on adding to this resource is trying to collect lists of contractors that will do this kind of work, that will do the installations, because it's proving more difficult than I hoped it would be.
Well, and I think workforce training is important too. And I know that several state agencies are interested in that topic and are trying to do something about it. So that should be something that the AIA should support, is that kind of workforce training.
Agreed. I think it's improving, but it's not there yet. And then the last thing that comes up a lot with this, which ties into cost a little bit, is just the whole issue of panel upgrades, when they're required, when they're not. That seems to push a lot of people over the edge. Oh, we have to upgrade our panel, so that's going to make it more expensive still. It's a harder economic argument to make sometimes.
So there are a lot of things coming down the pike. Some of them are already here that are going to help with that. One example are these switches that you can, for example, plug your water heater and your rechargeable car into this switch. And whenever your water heater kicks in, because you need hot water right that moment, the car charging turns off, so that you can run the car charging and the water heater on a single circuit. rather than have to put in 2 large circuits to do that. So that's one strategy. There are also smart panels that do the same for an entire house. That's another strategy. And then also is new equipment coming out that is 110 instead of 220. So there are already heat pump water washer dryers that are 110, and there are heat pump water heaters coming that are 110 instead of 220. So they'll draw a lot less amperage.
Great.
Bjorn has a question on strategies being used for educational and civic projects that often have tight budgets and limited flexibility. And then Rona also provided a comment and some questions. Rona, why don't you
Well,
state your question?
I think that Larry and Henry spoke to it, but I mean, my experience has been it's a tough sell, even if the metrics on big projects, even smaller institutional projects, because you get a lot of resistance from the people that care for and feed the buildings. I heard a lead engineer, standing engineer said, "I like big and clunky." And it's not just the old guys. Some of the young people, it's really like Larry says, like really a struggle. And some of the tradesmen don't know how to. Maybe they have to buy the equipment, but then try to get it to work. It's for people who work for big owners and the architects and engineers too. It's really a struggle. If you work on a project of substantial size for an institution, one of the services the architect should be paid for is you've written the spec, so it's really thorough, and it includes all of the training protocols that are going to go into place that you participate in. But you've got to start that process early, especially with something new, because bringing them online, it can be a real headache for the people like me who had to actually do it. And how would you, maybe it seems like it's outside the scope of the sell, but actually it's part of the business case, because if you have to bring people back and pay them more than once for the training and commissioning in your commissioning process, because these are commissioned buildings, right? Then the owner's going to pay for it twice, and it's going to dig away at your benefits. So it would be good to write that into whatever protocols we're putting out there for people to use.
So Bill and Scott, I know you've had, some larger sort of institutional projects that are all electric, and I'm just curious to, in response to Rona's comments, what kind of resistance you've met and how that's gone.
I mean, I think in our case, it's varied a little bit. One of our biggest clients is the University of California, and over a year ago they mandated all electric for heating and hot water for their carbon goals. So that's made that very easy. The exception for us is a lot of higher ed campuses that have a central plant. Sometimes they're very deeply wed to that central plant. There are several campuses that are replacing their central plant from gas to electric heat pump. Stanford has already done that, and Davis is in the middle of doing that, UC Davis. So those are two big campuses, and that's the University of California's biggest challenge right now.
My most recent anecdote about all that is a a project we're working on up in Petaluma that is a headquarters for a vegetarian deep green business, and we were trying to get them to do all electric, and the developer, who was just sort of a build-to-suit deal, the developer was kind of, no, we should do gas, and we're saying, no, really, it's a bad idea. Well, fortunately, the city of Petaluma came to the rescue and said all buildings will now be all electric. So I think it just illustrated to me the fact that we sort of gone beyond to a certain point, even though people can be convinced potentially with the various arguments that were very eloquently presented today. The bottom line is that if we just get the codes changed, then all that discussion's off the table and we just move on. But we do need to be able to do both in this transitional period.
And I'll just say that, you know, I'm nervous for our profession that if we get too far down the road with a mixed fuel building and your design's kind of all locked in and then the city changes it, sometimes they're not giving much of a time delay between implementing that law and when it goes into effect. San Francisco's looks to be set to pass theirs, and they were talking about it taking effect January 1st. And so, you know, you could be in for a pretty big redesign. So I would caution your clients about that.
And I would say really use the resource that Scott's been collecting of all of the buildings that are all electric. I know for some, you know, our all electric projects where we're working with cities here in Southern California, you know, I would say reach out to those design teams or reach out to those end clients and pull them in and help them make the case on your particular project, because I think clients that have gone that way get it and, you know, want to advocate for more all electric zero carbon buildings, and they think they could be a great resource for you.
I'm wondering if the case includes optimizing the envelope of a building. For me, the idea of the external wall being very well insulated and tight eliminates a lot of the need for the power of that building. And especially in residential in California, for the most part, it could be a no-brainer to not even have it. I mean, I live in Davis and I've taken out the air conditioning because I can use the Delta breeze in the night and then glide through the rest of the day with that cool air, except for about 6 days when it goes 110 and you know, and 90 during the night and stuff like that. It's tough, but I can stick it out over those days, and I think that would help a lot. And you know what else is nice about it? The acoustics. If you have a good optimized envelope, you don't have as much of the road sounds and other things like that coming in. It's just a cozier envelope for your building. I think that's a good thing to pursue. And I do want to just say real quick that I appreciate what Rona said, because I think it was right on. And what she's pointing out is the status quo, that people are always doing things the same old way. And we have new ways, but we also need to help educate people about these new ways and help bring them up and get them energized about it and help the subs. And but you know, what I found is that when you talk to people and you really try to hear their views and appreciate them, then they're more open to learn. And they want to learn for themselves, because the case can really be made with the ongoing operating costs of any building, home or commercial. Those go for years and years and years. And so the return on investment is very quick if you can have a very efficient energy system that's net zero energy. You can pay for that system pretty quickly as energy prices go up. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out.
So I think we need to use every tool in the toolbox, and passive design is certainly a great tool, and it's certainly a great place to start on every project. How far you take it is, you know, maybe subject to a little bit more financial analysis. Like, for example, the David Baker project looked at a real thorough passive house approach to that affordable housing project and found it to be too expensive. And I think as I've studied this over the years, I'd love the passive house approach to design. And I'm a sort of firm believer that you can get 90% of the way there with 75% of the effort. So, you know, that last 10% tends to be more expensive and harder to do. So I think there's a cost benefit analysis that you have to do on every project to figure out what are the right strategies for your particular project.
I wanted to just add to that, and I appreciate Susan bringing up this sort of residential scale thermal envelope equation, because I do feel like there is a risk as we focus more and more on carbon and on electrification, which are absolutely wonderful and game changing, to ignore, as Henry says, the rest of the toolbox. I do think, you know, the lazy architect will just add solar panels and not think about the other things. And it's a lot like sort of in the earlier waves of green design, people would say, you kind of have to earn the solar panels before you put solar panel on anything. Let's do some basic design about window orientation and sun shading and good insulation and all of those kinds of things. So it is good to always keep reminding ourselves that and keep training ourselves and training our staff that those basics still apply. And the better you have those, the less you need to solve this with carbon offsets or with solar panels or with some of these other things that also can get you there, but you have to work a lot harder for them. So, you know, for us in our practice, a lot of exterior insulation is still a great strategy, something that we didn't used to do. So we're trying to up our game on the thermal envelope in addition to some of these new strategies about heat pumps and electrification.
I'm curious if anybody else on the call has any enlightening anecdotes about trying to pitch the business case to clients, or, you know, I saw a couple of comments on the chat about resistance. Any other thoughts or suggestions about how we could approach this particular challenge?
You mean non-alcoholic ones? Well, there's sort of a, I mean, if you extrapolate from the political environment, how we communicate, you know, like if you, of course, I'm a little centric to how to get the guys that do the dirty work to support me at the receiving end. So, you know, partnerships with manufacturers, partnerships with product engineers, general contractors can be helpful because it might be a voice that helps the sell. We are approaching it with reason, but people are easily threatened. If you think of just, maybe it's far-fetched, but if you think of the compelling case that Vice President Biden made for transforming the country to greener fuel, and that's very threatening to people because it is. So I think that even at our scale of smaller buildings, whether they're residential or institutional, finding a way to have a common voice beyond just the dollars and cents might be helpful. And I'm sure people have done it, but we can probably do better.
And Bill, we've had some good success with using triple bottom line analysis, right? So we're looking far beyond just the first cost and looking at the life costs of the building. And what are the costs on the environment, on the economics, and on the people and the profitability, right? So a couple projects where we've taken that long-term look, productivity increases have been enormous and easily make the case. I mean, it basically the productivity can even pay for the entire first costs when you analyze it. So I think those tools can be really powerful.
There's a question on the chat about whether the issue of filtration and outdoor air ventilation and what the difference is between retrofits in a retrofit from gas heating, HVAC to heat pumps. Any mechanical engineers on this call who want to respond to that? I can give you my architect's understanding.
Well, I know, you know, new projects, you have to supply ventilation air mechanically. You know, every new project, you have to do that. And so for a new project, it's easy to then to add filtration to that. So you can take the same approach to a retrofit of both going all electric and then supplying outdoor ventilation air that's filtered as part of the retrofit.
And Alice, if you need a more detailed answer, you can send me an email and I can ask my colleagues for mechanical response. There were some kind of specific questions too about experience with electric fireplaces, and also too if anyone knows of a heat pump water heater that's smaller than 50 gallons.
Don't know about the heat pump, the water heaters. I know that there's been, we do a lot of affordable housing, and I do know that there's been a lag to the subject that was raised earlier, a lag in the industry to get scaled up heat pump water heaters for large institutional projects like that. It's slowly coming around. Right now, you can get them in Europe, but the affordable housing plans we work with have not been too excited about importing heat pump water heaters from Europe. So that's a great example of the industry sort of racing to try to catch up domestically.
I know at the David Baker project that I showed, they ganged up sand and water heaters and sort of ganged them up to make them operate at a larger scale, was how they did it.
Interesting.
Young brought up a good point of installing gas lines for future retail spaces, and concerns about being attractive space to lease with or without gas and the impacts of that. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts or comments on that.
I would say that that's a great example of where the rapidly changing electrification landscape across the state is going to have a big impact when people are really, can't be installing natural gas in their buildings anymore. That would sort of take care of that. But I think it's hard, to your point, it's hard, if it's an optional issue, it's hard to convince people to give up the old technology, unless they're really willing to listen to all the compelling arguments that have been made today, which may or may not be the case. It's remarkable how, for example, the commercial food industry is, we worked on projects where we've tried to drive down gas consumption in the past, and now currently trying to convince commercial cooking folks to invest in commercial induction cooking. And some folks embrace it, some folks don't want no part of it, and other folks just still, staff shows up at 6 a.m. They turn all the gas burners on and all the gas ovens on, and they turn them off when they go home at 4. So it's still quite a large educational process that needs to take place.
But there are professional chefs who are taking it up and in support of it. And again, you can get chefs to go down to the Fish Tech Center in San Ramon or whatever, Dublin, wherever it is out there, and actually use the equipment. And that's a good way to convince people that it's a realistic approach to a commercial kitchen.
Somebody asked about mini splits. Can we talk about that a little bit for existing homes? That seems like a good topic.
Yeah, there are all sorts of retrofits out there. Mini splits are an effective way to replace a gas system, but I would say at this point, it's quite a bit more expensive. They haven't gone down in price. So if you're just replacing your furnace, for example, in a retrofit in a house situation, a mini split is probably going to cost more money at this point, but that difference keeps shrinking. So I think it will get there. It will take, and when the cost of fuel keeps changing too, that will be another influence on it, because gas prices will go up faster than electrical prices.
Great. So hopefully everyone here feels like they can go make the case now very easily and have all the tools in their toolkit that they need. We still have about 15 minutes penciled out. So if there are any questions you had that I didn't pick up in the chat that you'd like to raise, please go ahead and unmute yourself and share with the group. Right. Okay. I guess I don't know. Bill, Jonathan, Henry, should we give everybody 15 minutes back in their schedules, or?
Well, I have a quick one that bothers me about Newsom. I love the guy and I'm proud of him in a lot of ways, but he authorized a whole bunch of new fracking licenses in the state of California when we have risk of earthquake, and we also have our underground water supplies that get poisoned and are uncleanable by that practice. And so I find it very hypocritical that he's, I'm glad he's setting the bar high for automobiles and homes and stuff like that, but that disconnect bothers me. I don't know about anybody else, and I wonder if we as architects could advocate for that kind of thing, because it flies in the face of having integrity about the whole situation and what's happening.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Can't disagree with that. I would just say this is a remarkably quiet crowd. People must be overwhelmed by the current.
I do have one comment. In residential, it seems that the push for the ADU to be all electric is a little bit easier because clients tend to think of that as kind of a secondary to the main residence, which it is, and so are a little bit more open to the idea of doing an all electric ADU.
Well, we need more ADUs. That's great. It's just a question of scalability. I think that's what we're kind of talking about here is you have to do the easy stuff first, but then we have to ultimately attack the larger scale projects, the larger scale multifamily residential projects, the commercial projects, and all the rest. So I guess the question is, anybody have any further closing suggestions around that?
I don't have a suggestion. This is Alice. Hey, Bill. Hey, everybody. Hi. Quick question. I wanted to, not to change the subject intentionally, but if we're closing, I wanted to actually ask this group, do we have a direct voice or some line to the governor's office, or who in the state do we have more direct contact with so that we can make our case together more strongly? Of course, I'm trying to find an entree to talk about putting a program together for zero carbon schools, for public schools.
I can take a shot at it from the perspective of AI California's efforts. I know that maybe to the earlier point, Governor Newsom's made lots of statements about supporting decarbonization, and yet it's been difficult to get his attention on that topic relative to the built environment. We have gotten some good traction with the California Energy Commission, and are working through a variety of different avenues to try to leverage whatever lobbying we can make in Sacramento. But I think the important thing is to continue to keep the pressure on and even ratchet it up, because time's a wasting. And I don't think the governor can necessarily. I think we discovered that the governor can't make by executive order, for example, the zero code law in the state of California. However, having his support for initiatives like zero code and for mandatory continuing education and zero carbon design and other things that we're advocating for, would be a huge help. So if anybody is good pals with Gavin, you know, let us know.
So, okay, so maybe this could be continued offline, Bill. It would be you that I would reach out to bring to other state agencies. So when we have other discussions, potentially with other state agencies, not just the Energy Commission, and obviously we have a great relationship with.
Yeah.
It will be you. You could represent AIA California.
Yeah.
Terrific.
Right. Also, Bill, I heard from Dan Burgoyne. Dan heads up, you may know him, he heads up the program with the Department of General Services. He's been there a long time, 20 years. And I asked him, oh, you're still around, right? Are you going to work with us? And he said, absolutely. He would like to very much be part of what you're doing. So if you don't know him, I'll make the introduction. If you know him, please do contact him. He's ready, willing, and able. And I would venture that he has the connections. He's been a leader in the executive branch program a long time, and they're very forward thinking. If slow moving, they're very forward thinking.
Thanks, Bruna. Yeah, we do know Dan. So.
I think that's the biggest liability that we've discovered with, or the biggest maybe roadblock, literally and figuratively, that we found with dealing with the state bureaucracy is that you know, fast tracking some of the stuff. In their minds, when you say fast track, they think 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. Yeah, that's about their timeline.
And we're thinking, no, in 10 years it's too late. We have to do it now.
Yeah.
So what is it about, you know, if we, as I always say, you know, if we're moving at such a snail's pace that we're going to have escargot before we know it. I think the important thing is to find ways to short circuit this. And I think that's one reason why we're trying to get to the governor to get him to more officially declare a climate emergency in the state, in which case that would help change everything. But that's an ongoing effort.
Maybe this is a good time to make a plug. So our next roundtable is going to be on February 10th. And the topic for that is tips and tricks, local level advocacy. So Scott and Simone will be leading the charge on that one. I think you're giving some great advice around advocacy on these topics.
I'd like to thank Jonathan and Henry and Heidi for doing a great job. And just stress one more time that the business case is absolutely key, you know, to getting these initiatives moving forward, and to convince people that the future is not to be feared, but is to be fully embraced, and also to prepare our profession for this rapidly changing landscape. We need to become experts in this rapidly, like right away. Hopefully this session has been provided some food for thought, and you know, I'm sure everyone on the call would be welcome to contact us individually if you have any further questions or want to continue the conversation.
Yeah, Jonathan or Henry, do you have any closing thoughts?
I just had one, which is any feedback, any future links, any suggestions after you've read the white paper on kind of how to improve it. It's a collective effort and it's a tool for all of us. So what you see in the white paper had a lot of hands in it and a lot of suggestions, and to the extent you have something to say, put your hand in it too.
Great. Okay, we'll give everybody 9 minutes back into their day. Thank you so much for spending your lunch with us.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Very nice
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Great job,
I
Heidi.
enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.